Okay, so for our mini lecture on South Asia region, turn to another fascinating part of the world with countries including Afghanistan and Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, and of course the mighty India. Looking first at some environmental issues of the region, in particular vulnerability to climate change, glacial melting, and sea level rise. South Asia's three largest rivers are fed by glaciers in the Himalayas. Glacial melting is particularly concerning there, especially because of the implications for water availability. As glaciers shrink, they provide less water each year to recharge, aquifers beneath heavily populated Indo-Gangetic Plain. You've probably heard of the Indus and the Ganges rivers. The plain between and containing those rivers is called the Indo-Gangetic Plain. Water conservation and increased water storage are needed for supplies to last through the dry winter monsoon, which affects the region every year. Tens of millions of poor farmers and fishers live near sea level in South Asia, in particular, most in Bangladesh, which is the most densely populated area in the world. More poor or vulnerable to sea level rise than any other country there. Rising per capita water usage. This is again per capita or per person. Domestic water consumption tends to be lower for the poor. Consumption increases as incomes rise. The middle and upper classes consumed close to 13 gallons per day or more. This number is significantly higher in North America and Western Europe. As more South Asians join the middle class, they will consume more water per capita. And water for production of agriculture and industrial products is drawn from supplies so scarce that ordinary citizens often must survive on less water than is considered healthy. Has large public health implications as a result. And in dry regions, water for crops and industry draw down faster than naturally replenish, draw down the aquifers, so this is not sustainable. Water allocation, we can look at how South Asia has more than 20% of the world's population, but only 4% of its fresh water, and with limited ways of transporting water to the region, unlike other areas of the world where it can be piped. Water disputes increasingly are common, with political rivalries and bureaucratic inertia or energy having delayed development and implementation of national water policies, particularly in between Pakistan and India. In Delhi, 17 five-star hotels use about 210,000 gallons of water daily. This is enough to serve the needs of over 1 million people in Delhi slums. So this really highlights the extreme disparity between water allocation. In the late 1990s, India signed a treaty with Pakistan promising fair distribution of water. However, as of 2010, Bangladesh is still receiving considerably reduced flow. Here's a map of human impact in the region. You see the North India and South India heavily human impacted. Industrial air pollution is a very significant concern, particularly in India, with public health warning air quality days now surpassing Chinese rates and severities. Many parts of South Asia, the air and water is endangered by industrial activity. Delhi's air is equivalent to smoking 20 cigarettes a day. The Taj Mahal, the famous site, palace, white marble, was becoming pitted with acid rain. Legislation successfully promoted that has removed hundreds of the most polluting factories from India's river valleys. Here you see a very significant smoky bus pillowing through New Delhi, which the authors point out now rivals Beijing, China, for having the worst air pollution in the world. And just to continue that thread with human geography, fascinating language and ethnic diversities across the region. In India, there are 18 languages officially recognized. There are hundreds of distinct languages within these zones, Complexity results partly from the region's history of multiple invasions from the outside. We have seen in previous units lots of migrations from other regions, including Tibet to the north or Persia to the west. This complexity results, yes, as I said, partly from invasions, but there are also variants of Hindi, our national language for both India and Pakistan. They're called Urdu, but it is first language only of a minority of people in Pakistan. And English is the common second language throughout the region, stemming from Britain's colonial occupation of the region, including Pakistan and Bangladesh, which used to be part of the British colony of India. The religious traditions of South Asia. Hinduism is practiced by approximately 900 million people, most of whom live in India. It's a very complex belief system with roots in ancient literary texts and highly localized folk traditions. So by no means a uniform religion, very diverse. Buddhism, it originated in India in the 6th century BCE, before the Common Era, as a reinterpretation of Hinduism, some scholars would say, emphasizes modest living and peaceful self-reflection. And Jainism originated as a reformist movement within Hinduism more than 2,000 years ago, found mainly in Western India with large urban centers throughout the region, known for educational achievements, nonviolence, and strict vegetarianism. Sikhism combines the beliefs of Islam and Hinduism. In the East Bay, we see many Sikhs. Okay, here's a map of those major religions. Very interesting distribution, differentiation, crossovers. You can see Sri Lanka, the island nation to the southeast coast of India, heavily Buddhist, as well as Bhutan in the north. The Mughal legacy. The last great Mughal leader died in 1707, but the cultural legacy remained. 520 million Muslims now living in South Asia, left a unique heritage of architecture, art, and literature, miniature paintings, and lyric poetry. And we can see the independence and partition, fearing that they would be persecuted if they did not move. More than 7 million Hindus and Sikhs migrated from India, from the ancestral home in what had become West or East Pakistan, Pakistan or current-day Bangladesh, respectively. A similar number of Muslims left homes in India from one of the other parts of Pakistan. Civil society broke down. Partition was tragic, culminating divide and rule approach of the British. Divide and conquer, some would say. Heightened tensions between South Asian Muslims and Hindus led to large amount of violence. This created a role for British as seemingly indispensable and benevolent. However, the post-independence period, democracy expanded steadily, but somewhat slowly. India, now the world's most populous democracy. Pakistan has repeated elections, and some governments have been modestly effective. And it's important to remember that after independence, progress in agricultural production was slow until the late 1960s, when the Green Revolution brought market improvements. And so to touch on globalization and development along those lines of the Green Revolution, here we see a basic map of the industries across India in particular. Food production. Until the 1960s, agriculture was based on traditional small-scale systems that managed to feed families in good years, but often left them hungry or starving during the droughts or floods. The so-called Green Revolution's benefits have been uneven. Some Indian states have extensive irrigation networks that have increased prosperity tremendously. However, in other areas, poor farmers are still unable to afford special seeds, fertilizers, pesticides, new equipment, and they have not been able to compete and have had to give up farming. very similar to the history of farming in North America in that regard. And South Asia needs alternatives to standard green revolution strategies such as high chemical inputs and petroleum dependent technologies, but it will be difficulty maintaining the current levels of food production over a long term because of this. Here we see a map of the farming systems across the region. Gives you a sense of the distribution of the different systems and also how they correspond with different climatic and geographic zones. Green revolution alternatives, important to keep in mind. Agroecology's potential revolution for some of the remedy for some of the failings. Agroecology often involves the revival and use of traditional methods, fertilizing crops with animal manure, for instance, intercropping with legumes to add nitrogen and organic matter, water conservation being a key technique, also using natural predators to control pests instead of pesticides. Also emerging in the region is the process of microcredit. Makes very small loans to poor would-be business owners. Banks are generally not interested in administering small loans to poor people, especially women. This was started in the 1970s by Muhammad Yunus, economics professor in Bangladesh, and it's been highly successful. Borrowers, of whom more than 90% are women, are organized into small groups collectively responsible for repaying any loans to the group members. There's mutual accountability and collaboration, and called the Grameen Bank. They meet in a rural area near Dhaka, Bangladesh, the most densely populated city in the world. Following the model established in 1974, they gather weekly to discuss business and repay their loan installments. To touch briefly on power and politics across the region, nationalism is still a very big concern. In particular, religious nationalism, the association of a particular religion or particular territory, political unit to the exclusion of other religions. Ultimate goal is often political control over a given territory. Urban men from middle and upper caste groups are predominant supporters of Hindu nationalism, and whereby proponents promote Hinduism, the fear of erosion of their caste and political influence. Recent extension of the quota system for government jobs, admission to universities to lower caste groups. Here we see a map of some of the political issues from the text since 1947. Independence from Britain. South Asian countries have had much success in peacefully resolving conflicts. That's important to remember, especially the smooth transfers of power and nurturing public debate over issues. However, there have been many cases as well of supporters opposing political ideologies have tried to resolve differences through violence. You see conflict zones here with the number of deaths mapped out. Particularly virulent source of conflict is corruption, often linked to purposeful bureaucratic inefficiency, especially soliciting bribes to perform a service. You can see a hotspot zone up in contested territories in northeastern Pakistan, northern India, the Kashmir region, still disputed territories there between the two countries. And lastly, on the urbanization front, you can look at village and city life. About 70% of South Asians live in hundreds of thousands of villages, although only 30% of the region's population lives in urban areas. This is quickly transforming, especially with urban technologies reaching into the rural areas, the cell phone being a key example of this. Over half of the population of South Asia now having access to cell phones and the digital literacy that comes with that. Elegant high-rise condominiums coming into rural areas as well, built for cities, rapidly growing middle class. They're spreading throughout the region. Wealth also extends through cities' creative art industries, including the Bollywood film industry. But at the street level, urban landscape is dominated by a large number of people living on sidewalk, narrow spaces, large shanty towns, the largest in the world. There's also a severe risk to children in these urban settings. 23 million children between 5 and 14 years old working in South Asia, most of them in urban areas, including farms though as well. Children work primarily in informal sectors such as domestic servants, export-oriented factories. The role of children as family workers must be balanced with the need to have children to attend school. One of the chief benefits of urban life is education, better access to education, where children learn skills that will enable them to survive and prosper in the modern economy. So that's it for this week, and I encourage you to post your questions below, and we'll continue the discussions there. Thanks.